David, good to see you there. So why is the U.S. remaining firm on its Niger military presence?
Well, I think the U.S. does not want to find itself being contaminated by the anti-French sentiment. The United States want to rely very much on its own domestic and foreign policy interest in Niger. It has, one of the largest drone bases, two of them actually, based in Niger. And perhaps the U.S. realizes that the French brand has been burned and become quite toxic. So what the U.S. is doing is trying to position itself in such a way that the vacuum that the French will leave perhaps will not be exploited by other external parties who are interested in geopolitics. So the U.S. is just looking after its own interests, and of course the U.S. has made very sure and very clear that it will not side with the French on this one, because of course it wants to protect its strategic position in Niger and the rest of the African countries that the U.S. is involved in.
So, David, we have seen indeed a lot of anti-French sentiment in the Sahel region, but why are there no major anti-U.S. protests in Niger and the rest of the Sahel?
Well, I think it's very simple. The United States was not as involved in the colonial period in terms of foreign policy and having colonial countries. So the countries like France, have had this very bad history of colonial exploitation. But of course, I think what the U.S. is considering at this point in time is that the French are associated with the West. And of course, the U.S. is being very careful not to get itself involved in a situation where the anti-French sentiment will turn into an anti-Western sentiment. But of course, the key issue here has been that democracy as a system of governance, which of course the United States says it champions, is one of the determinant factors that is leading to these military coups, according to the justification that these coup beneficiaries are giving. So I guess that the U.S. is also very careful to ensure that there is quite a distinction between how it wants to manage democracy in the continent and also how it wants to manage the anti-French sentiment. It wants to stay away from the anti-French sentiment and manage the democratic process in the continent.
And so, David, if we do go back to that history of French and the Sahel region countries, what exactly prompted the declining influence of France in the Sahel? And what happens now to French institutions like Alliance Francaise, given that France has been in that region for over 60 years now?
Well, it's very simple. The French have not changed with time. They're still operating as if those countries are part of France, the old Francafrique assimilation system of governance. But the difference is these countries have realized that while France is progressing as a democratic institution, developmental-wise, politically advanced, its colonies or former colonies that it called part of France are reclining. And so, the younger generation are no longer interested in having France to dictate how the economy, how the political systems work. So I believe that, the biggest issue is that, the French have refused to change, they've refused to amend the system of governance in Africa, and they still have a very stronghold on some of the old leaders who came to power as a result of being very close to France. The new generation is no longer interested, and with the global changes that we've seen in the world, the style of government that France used to practice and the stronghold is no longer valuable at this point in time. And the French are losing their their colonial countries, at breakneck speed. So I hope that the French can change strategy and come back at some point. But for now, I think the French are losing big.